Fordow sits inside a mountain, not next to one, inside it. Centrifuge halls buried under roughly 80 meters of rock, built specifically so that nothing in the American or Israeli arsenal could reach them. For years, that was the assumption Iranian planners built their entire nuclear strategy around. Then, in June of 2025, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flew a multi-hour route toward that mountain and dropped 14 GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators on it. Axios reported the number directly from officials briefed on the operation, which the Pentagon named Midnight Hammer. That single detail, 14 bombs, 7 bombers, 1 mountain, is the starting point for understanding everything that has happened since, including the much larger war that followed less than a year later. To understand why bunker busters keep showing up in headlines about Iran, you have to understand what the GBU-57 actually is. It is not a missile. It has no engine. It is a guided steel bomb, roughly 30,000 pounds, over 20 feet long, built by Boeing specifically to solve one problem: targets buried so deep that ordinary explosives can't touch them. According to specifications documented by the U.S. Air Force, the casing is engineered to punch through as much as 200 feet of rock or reinforced concrete before the payload inside detonates. Only one aircraft in the American arsenal can carry it internally, the B-2 Spirit, and even that aircraft can only carry 2 at a time. There is no other country on Earth that possesses this weapon. That exclusivity is precisely why Fordow became the center of gravity for the entire conflict. Here's where the story often gets flattened into a single headline moment, when really it's a chain of escalation stretching across more than a year. The Midnight Hammer strikes in June 2025 were framed at the time as a one-off operation. A strike on the nuclear program, not the opening move of a prolonged war. That changed on February 28, 2026. On that date, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated large-scale strike campaign against Iran that went far beyond nuclear infrastructure. According to Wikipedia's sourced timeline of the conflict, corroborated by multiple wire reports from that period, the strikes killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. That is not a minor footnote. The assassination of a sitting supreme leader is the kind of event that redraws the entire strategic map of a region overnight. And it's exactly what triggered what analysts now call the 2026 Iran War. Iran's response was immediate and economic as much as military. The regime closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which a significant share of the world's seaborne oil passes. In answer, the United States imposed a naval blockade on Iran starting in mid-April of 2026, intercepting vessels attempting to leave Iranian ports. The Department of Defense estimated, according to reporting cited in the Wikipedia summary of the campaign, that the blockade cost Iran close to $5 billion in lost oil revenue within roughly the first month alone. This is the kind of detail that rarely makes it into a 30-second news clip, but it matters enormously because it explains why both sides kept escalating instead of settling into a ceasefire. Iran was bleeding money. The United States was betting that pressure would force capitulation. It didn't, not quickly. Instead, the war entered a second bunker buster phase in March 2026. This time, the weapon wasn't the 30,000-pound GBU-57. It was a different bomb entirely. The GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator, a 5,000-pound class bunker buster that had made its combat debut only shortly before. According to Air Force Times, which quoted Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane directly at a Pentagon briefing alongside Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, U.S. forces dropped these penetrator weapons into underground storage facilities, holding Iranian coastal defense cruise missiles near the Strait of Hormuz. Kane's own words as reported, the U.S. military dropped 5,000-pound penetrator weapons into underground storage facilities, a detail he attributed directly to a CENTCOM report from the day before. That's about as close to on-the-record confirmation as this kind of story gets. A 4-star general naming the weapon, the target type, and the source, on camera at a podium. The Pentagon's own procurement decisions tell you almost as much about the war as the strikes themselves. In February 2026, Defense News and the Air and Space Forces Association both reported that the Air Force had awarded Boeing a sole source contract, meaning no competitive bidding, because Boeing is literally the only company that manufactures the GBU-57, worth more than $100 million, specifically to replace the bunker busters expended in the original Fordow and Natanz strikes. Sole source contracts of that scale, issued on an urgent basis, are not routine. The justification notice explicitly stated that any delay in awarding it would create unacceptable delays for U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command's readiness. In plain terms, the Pentagon burned through its bunker buster stockpile fast enough that replenishing it became a stated readiness emergency, with deliveries not even beginning until January 2028. That's a 2-year gap between using the weapon and refilling the shelf, which brings us to right now to the state of things as of early August 2026, because this war has not stopped. It has just changed shape. Al Jazeera's interactive tracking of the campaign reported that the United States has launched more than 100 air attacks across Iran since July 8th alone, with Iranian officials claiming at least 50 people killed and more than 500 wounded in that stretch. Those casualty figures come from Iranian officials, not independently verified Western sources, so they should be treated as a claim from one side of the conflict rather than a confirmed fact, a distinction worth holding on to, because Iranian state figures and U.S. military figures have diverged sharply throughout this war. What is independently confirmed by CNN is that the U.S. reimposed its naval blockade and struck military sites along Iran's southern coast near the Strait of Hormuz, even as a fragile ceasefire arrangement was technically still in place. CNN's live coverage from early August adds another layer that rarely gets attention in bunkerbuster-focused content: the U.S. announced plans on August 1st for what officials described as strikes as soon as this weekend, only for President Trump to reportedly cancel them after. According to CNN sourcing, both the Saudi Crown Prince and Iranian intermediaries pushed for de-escalation. CNN military analyst and former Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton was quoted explaining the logic. Saudi Arabia is economically exposed through the Strait of Hormuz and needs the waterway reopened for its own oil exports, giving Riyadh a direct incentive to pressure both Washington and Tehran toward calm. That's a reminder that this conflict isn't a two-party story. Gulf states with enormous financial stakes and regional stability have been quietly steering the diplomacy behind the scenes. There's a resource dimension to this that's easy to miss if you're only watching for explosions. CNN reported on August 4th that the U.S. military has exhausted nearly 80% of its interceptors for a key missile defense system, with senior commanders warning, in CNN's words, that Pentagon munitions stockpiles are dangerously low. Combine that with the 2-year wait for new bunker busters, and you get a fuller picture of why the pace of strikes has become uneven. Bursts of intense activity followed by pauses that get labeled as ceasefires, but that may just as easily reflect a military recalculating what it can afford to keep expending. As for where diplomacy actually stands, ABC News reported that, as of August 9th, Iran said the two countries were passing messages through intermediaries, rather than holding direct, formal talks, despite earlier suggestions of imminent negotiations. President Trump, in comments to Axios reported by ABC, described the U.S. posture as semi-negotiating, adding that Iran was dealing with what he called huge inflation and dwindling financial resources. Oman has continued serving as a mediator on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, with reports suggesting Iran is seeking a temporary arrangement lasting up to 3 months to manage its own access through the waterway, according to CNN's August 4th coverage. So where does that leave the original question? Did the U.S. military just drop a devastating bunker buster on Iran? Here's the honest answer, because pretending otherwise would misrepresent the actual record. The confirmed on-the-record bunker buster strikes are the June 2025 Midnight Hammer operation against Fordow and Natanz, and the March 2026 Operation Epic Fury strikes using GBU-72 penetrators near the Strait of Hormuz. The more than 100 strikes reported since July 8th are real and ongoing, but available reporting as of this week does not specifically confirm bunker buster munitions in that latest wave. It describes broader air attacks on military sites. If you're seeing this title attached to fresh footage, the responsible read is that it's most likely describing the broader, verified pattern of American bunker buster use against Iran across this 18-month conflict, anchored in a war that is still actively unfolding, rather than a single brand new strike that's been independently confirmed by named sources as of today. To be fully transparent about sourcing, the background on Operation Midnight Hammer and the GBU-57 specifications comes from Axios and U.S. Air Force documentation. The February 2026 replenishment contract is confirmed by Defense News and the Air and Space Forces Association. The March 2026 GBU-72 strikes are confirmed on the record by Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane, as reported by Air Force Times. The broader war timeline, the February 28th strikes, the assassination of Khamenei, the naval blockade, is documented in Wikipedia's sourced summary of the 2026 Iran war, and corroborated by contemporaneous wire coverage. The most recent strike volume and casualty claims come from Al Jazeera, citing Iranian officials for casualty figures specifically, which remain unverified by independent Western sources. The current diplomatic status, munitions stockpile concerns, and Trump's recent comments come from CNN and ABC News, reporting dated August 1st through August 9th, 2026. Anything not tied to one of those named sources has been left out of this script entirely rather than guessed at. What do you think happens next in Fordow's shadow? Does this pressure campaign actually force Iran back to the negotiating table, or does an under-resourced Pentagon and a wounded but unbroken regime in Tehran just settle into a longer, grinding stalemate around the Strait of Hormuz? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.